Welcome to Weekly News Highlights, where we wrap up your week with a glimpse back into what went on over the past week. I'm Kim Dami in Seoul. Official campaigning for the April general election is now in full swing here in South Korea. From putting up posters to delivering speeches with music and cheering, official campaigning will last around 2 weeks. Just around 2,100 newborns were born in January here in South Korea, meaning the number of new babies born dropped to a fresh low in January, deepening the country's population crisis. South Korea and the United States have slapped yet another round of sanctions on 6 North Korean nationals and 2 third country entities for helping Pyongyang secure funds for its weapons of mass destruction programs. We're less than 2 weeks away from South Korea's general election. Streets here in the country are now filled with speeches, music, and cheering, all for the high-stakes election that is slated for April 10th. Our National Assembly correspondent Lee Si-hoo takes us on the campaign trail.
Sounds of cheering and music filled the streets on Thursday as official campaigning kicked off for the April 10th general election. From early morning, candidates embarked on the final part of their journey to win seats in the 22nd National Assembly of South Korea. Ruling People Power Party's interim leader Han Dong-eun visited Seodaemungu district in northwestern Seoul to call for support for the party and the candidate running to represent the district, Lee Yong-ho. Han said the outcome of the election will determine whether South Korea moves forward or backward.
This is not just an election repeating after a few years. This is a really crucial election that will determine the fate of South Korea.
Promising reform in the economy, people's livelihoods, and politics, Han continued his speeches in Yongsan-gu district in central Seoul, the same district where the main opposition Democratic Party held its campaign kickoff ceremony. DP leader Lee Jae-myung encouraged support for his party, calling the election a place for judgment.
This election isn't a place for the Democratic Party and our candidates to win, but where the citizens can declare that they are the sovereign of this country.
Lee supported candidate Kang Tae-young running in the district before moving on to other districts in Seoul and Incheon City, also in the capital region. Meanwhile, minor parties launched their campaigns at key locations nationwide, with the Reform Party led by the former PPP leader Lee Jun-seok in Seoul, and Saemilnae Party led by the former Prime Minister Lee Na-kyun in Daejeon, the Rebuilding Korea Party launched by former Justice Minister Jo Guk in Busan, and the Green Justice Party, a coalition formed by the Justice Party and the Green Party Korea in Goyang. The fierce race for seats in the National Assembly will last for 13 days, up until the day before Election Day. Until then, expect to see colorful posters and hear catchy songs out in the streets. Lee Si-hoo, Arirang News.
And Korean voters residing overseas are also heading to their embassies and consular centers to have their voices heard. We have our National Assembly correspondent Shin Ha-young joining us here in the studio. Welcome, Ha-young.
Great to be here, Tommy.
So, Ha-young, overseas voting is in full swing, isn't it?
Right, Tommy. Following the 2-day candidate registration last week, overseas voting for Koreans living abroad began on Wednesday. A total of 220 polling stations in 115 countries will be open from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. for voters until April 1st. However, overseas voting is only available for those who register in advance. And Korean citizens without a permanent address in Korea can vote for proportional representatives in the Assembly, and those with a permanent address may vote for both proportional and regional lawmakers.
In the last general election, I remember the voting turnout was the lowest ever, and that was because of the pandemic. Now, can we expect a higher turnout this year?
Well, we'll have to wait until the voting is over to know for sure, but the number of overseas voters who have registered in advance has dropped. And according to the National Election Commission, nearly 148,000 overseas voters have registered for the 22nd general election, accounting for about 7.5% of the total overseas voters. And this marks a 14% drop from the previous general election in 2020. The Commission attributes this to a decrease in the overall number of eligible overseas voters voters, including Korean students studying abroad. However, the turnout on the first day of overseas voting, which took place on Wednesday, was 9.4%, triple that of the first day of the previous election. And with no COVID-19 measures in place this year, attention is now on how much the turnout will increase this year. And by country, the highest numbers of overseas Korean voters are in the U.S. with over 33,600, followed by Japan and China.
Hayoung, then let's go over how things are looking in each country.
Well, from the first day, overseas voters traveled long distances to cast their ballots. In some cities, including Beijing, Hanoi, and Virginia, shuttle buses are operated to encourage voting. Let's first take a listen to what overseas voters from different countries had to say.
It took about 3.5 hours by high-speed train to come to this polling station.
I'm proud to cast a ballot for South Korea.
I hope the new parliament understands the issues facing society and remains united to solve problems. Seeing happy families in Sweden, I also hope South Korea works towards creating a fair environment where parents can equally share responsibility for their children.
The overseas voters in Sweden mentioned that the online registration process for overseas voting was complicated and expressed hope that improvements to the system be made.
A close race is expected here in the metropolitan area. That's why votes from overseas Koreans is being considered as one of the determining factors. In light of this, the leaders of both ruling and opposition party have encouraged overseas voting, right? Let's talk about that.
You're right, Dami. The ruling People Power Party's interim leader Han Dong-un addressed overseas voters during his speech on Friday on behalf of the party's satellite party, the People Future Party. Han emphasized enhancing the rights and interests of overseas Koreans, and he also pledged to ensure safety, education, and care for overseas Korean voters and their children, while also firmly responding against any discrimination and hatred. And the main opposition Democratic Party initiated its campaign last week aimed at encouraging Koreans living overseas who are eligible to vote to do so. The party pledged to strengthen support for fostering the identity of overseas Koreans by increasing aid to Korean schools and expanding scholarships. It also stressed its commitment to providing them with the same level of administrative service as is available domestically. And after the overseas voting, which ends on Monday, early voting in South Korea will commence on April 5th.
All right, Hayoung, thank you so much for that comprehensive report today.
Always my pleasure.
The South Korean government's call for trainee doctors to return to duty persists. The government set March 31st this weekend as the last deadline for them to return to their respective hospitals and their patients, while pledging to enhance their working conditions. Our Choi Soo-hyung has the details.
The South Korean government once again urged trainee doctors to return to their hospitals by the end of March. The government said interns won't be able to start their new training in the hospitals unless they finish their new employment registration by next Tuesday.
To all trainee doctors, please return to the training hospital until March. For those who have been accepted as interns this year, you are required to register by April 2nd. If you fail to register by this deadline, you will not be able to undergo internship training for the first half of this year.
The government has also stated that it will promptly improve in the working conditions for trainee doctors. Firstly, it plans to shorten the working hours of trainee doctors, enacting medical laws to limit maximum shift length to 36 hours, starting on a trial basis from May. The government will provide additional training expenses of 1 million Korean won, almost $900 to trainee doctors in essential medical sectors like obstetrics and emergency medicine. The number of cooperating hospitals for cancer patients will be expanded from the existing 100 to 150. Currently, President Yoon Suk-yeol has proposed discussions with the medical community on the healthcare budget and healthcare reforms. The government has been presenting numerous alternative measures over the past few days. However, the medical community's response has been firm. Im Hyun-taek, a pediatrician elected as the new leader of the Korean Medical Association, insists on completely nullifying the government's plan to increase medical school admissions by 2,000 places. Moreover, professors from so-called Big Five medical schools in Seoul, including Seoul National University, Yonsei University, Ulsan University, Catholic University, and Seongkyungwan University, have all agreed to submit resignation letters. Among the trainee doctors who began resigning 6 weeks ago, none have returned yet, and over 10,000 medical students have applied for leave. To minimize disruption to patient care, the government says it will deploy an additional 1,900 physician assistant nurses and 200 more public health doctors. Choi Hyung, Arirang News.
Typically, January sees the highest number of new babies here in South Korea. But just around 2,100 babies were born this past January. That's already a record low for any January in the past. Our Lee Soo-jin tells us more.
The number of births in South Korea dropped again in the first month of the year. Data from Statistics Korea on Wednesday shows that the number of births came to 21,442 in January, down 7.7% compared to the same month last year. That's the lowest on record for any month of January. The number of deaths came to 32,490, falling 0.5% compared to the previous year. But the officials said the drop is mostly due to the COVID-19 pandemic-related deaths that were reported in January 2023, and that the agency expects to see an increase in the number of deaths in the future due to South Korea's aging population. With the number of deaths once again exceeding the number of births, the decline in natural population, calculated by subtracting the number of deaths from the number of births, came to some 11,000. South Korea has now seen a drop in its natural population for 51 consecutive months, and the agency expects to continue to see a decline in the coming months. The number of registered marriages, however, rose 11.6% to some 20,000, and the number of divorces was also up 9.5% to nearly 8,000. The agency said that the on-year rises were mostly because there were more working days where people could register their marriages and divorces in January this year compared to last year, when Seoll날, or the Lunar New Year, was in the first month of the year. He added that further observation is needed to see whether there will be an uptick in the number of marriages this year. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
Through our previous series on robots, we know of robots that can make coffee and those that can do deliveries. But expanding their work boundaries, some are now assisting humans in the manufacturing process. Our An Sung-ji went out to check out the latest technologies at one of Asia's leading technology exhibitions.
Robots are now being looked at to lead automation in the manufacturing industry. Smart Factory and Automation World 2024, hosted by the Ministries of Trade and SMEs, kicked off on Wednesday, showcasing various robots from more than 400 companies with nearly 70,000 people participating.
The solution to a lack of manpower is a digital transformation, and applying technology like AI can boost productivity and increase safety in the workplace.
Hanwha Robotics, which first launched collaborative robots in 2017, develops robots that are used in multiple industries, including those of automobiles and electronics. These robots perform not only simple tasks such as picking up and placing heavy objects, but are also capable of screwing things in, polishing, and welding. They have a similar reach to a human being and can help when a workspace is narrow.
As the working population is shrinking, these robots can fill gaps in the unstable employment market. Workers also get to do more productive tasks rather than tedious jobs. We're looking to create a total robot solution.
Similarly, this company, Rainbow Robotics, also provides solutions for automation with a specialization in humanoid robots. The company provides manufacturing collaborative robots such as robotic arms to boost productivity. Its two-armed robot is being introduced for the first time at this exhibition. At 120 to 170 centimeters tall and weighing around 50 kilograms, they can perform the exact same tasks a human can with 5 fingers on each hand that can bend and pick things up. With artificial intelligence, they can also easily perform input tasks.
We're now looking to focus more on autonomous mobile robots that can assist workers in the retail sector, including humanoid robots. The possibility for automation is near infinite, and it's important to have an internalized platform like ours.
The global automation market is expected to grow up to nearly $400 billion by 2029 from $200 billion in 2022.
With continuous government support, the sales of domestically built industrial robots are expected to grow up to 3.1 trillion won, or $2.3 billion by the end of this year. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
Russia has voted against extending the mandate of the UN expert panel in charge of monitoring the enforcement of sanctions against North Korea. Seoul called out Russia, as did Washington, saying that Moscow's decision is to cover up its arms deals with Pyongyang.
For the past 15 years, a panel of experts has been monitoring United Nations sanctions against North Korea over its nuclear program, reporting twice a year to the Security Council and recommending action for improved implementation of the measures. But Russia vetoed a one-year extension of the panel during a vote on Thursday, bringing an end to its operation when its current mandate expires on April 30th. Of the 15 council members, China abstained from the vote, while the remaining 13 member states voted in favor. During the Security Council meeting, South Korea's ambassador to the United Nations pointed out that Russia seems to be more interested in embracing North Korea for providing munitions and ballistic missiles for the Ukraine war, at the expense of the proper functioning of the council.
This is almost comparable to destroying a CCTV to avoid being caught red-handed.
But Russia hit out at the experts, saying the group has ceased to carry out its obligations.
Its work is increasingly being reduced to playing into the hands of Western approaches, reprinting biased information and analyzing newspaper headlines and poor quality photos.
A spokesperson for South Korea's foreign ministry criticized Russia's move, saying it was an irresponsible action that greatly undermines the trust of the UN Security Council within the international community, at a time when monitoring UN sanctions against North Korea needs to be strengthened. Thursday's decision comes as Russia has recently been deepening military ties with North Korea. Officials from South Korea and the U.S. have said North Korea has provided munitions and military equipment to Russia for use in the war in Ukraine. The U.S. said it's deeply disappointed by Russia's latest actions, calling it an example of greater cooperation between Moscow and Pyongyang.
Moscow appears to be intent on facilitating the DPRK's illegal pursuit of weapons of mass destruction, and its veto today was a self-interested effort to bury the panel's reporting on its own collusion with the DPRK to secure weapons that it can use to further its aggression against Ukraine.
With the monitoring of North Korea sanctions set to end next month, there are concerns that the Security Council could lose a reliable measure of informing UN member states of sanctions violations by North Korea. Peunji, Arirang News.
In the meantime, South Korea and the United States' efforts to cut North Korea's sources of funding used for its nuclear and missile programs continue. This Thursday, the two partners created yet another blacklist of sanctions against the regime. Our Peunji has the details.
South Korea and the U.S. have newly added 2 entities and 4 individuals to their sanctions list for their involvement in illicit financing and generating revenue through overseas North Korean information technology workers that are used to fund the regime's nuclear and missile development. This includes a UAE-based firm called Pioneer Bangkok Star Real Estate and a Russia-based company called Alice LLC. South Korea's foreign ministry explained Thursday that the 2 companies were sanctioned for engaging in the dispatch and operations of North Korean IT workers abroad. Also on the sanctions list are 4 bank representatives, Yoo Bu-ung, Han Chul-man, Jung Sung-ho, and Oh In-jun, for evading sanctions and funding North Korea's nuclear missile development through illegal financial activities such as money laundering. The foreign ministry said Yoo Bu-ung in particular is a person that South Korea and the U.S. have both been tracking. The U.S. State Department also described Yoo as a linchpin in North Korea's illicit financial activities and a person that's skilled at employing various schemes to avoid detection. The latest action aligns with the 6th South Korea-U.S. Working Group meeting to counter North Korean cyber threats, a 2-day meeting that began Wednesday in Washington, D.C. Seoul's foreign ministry said the sanctions are expected to raise awareness of the risks related to transactions involving these individuals and entities, not just domestically, but also within the international community. A recent report by a panel of experts at the United Nations shows North Korea has obtained about half of its total foreign currency income through financial theft, such as hacking and cyber attacks. And these funds were used to cover 40% of the resources needed for developing weapons of mass destruction. 배은지, Arirang News.
North Korea's Kim Yo-jong said in a statement that Japan's prime minister has proposed a summit with the regime. In a statement on Monday released by the regime's state-run news agency, she said improving their bilateral relations depends on Japan's political determination and that there'll be no breakthroughs as long as the Kishida administration brings up the issue of Japanese citizens abducted by the North. But the next day, she said Pyongyang won't accept any contact with Tokyo regarding a possible Kim Jong-un-Kishida summit. Now, experts say it seems there has been communication between the North and Japan, but they have not been able to reach a meaningful agreement. North Korea appears to be using a mixed strategy aimed at pressuring Japan to make a political decision. And some pundits also say North Korea aims to use the summit to weaken the trilateral partnership between Seoul, Tokyo, and Washington, and eventually use the meeting as a stepping stone for a summit with the U.S. Now, if the summit does take place, it will be the first time in more than 20 years for the leaders of North Korea and Japan to meet. South Korea crushed Thailand 3-0 on Tuesday in Bangkok to stay atop of Group C in the Asian World Cup qualifiers, which means they've all but qualified for the next stage. The win was all but the more significant after a recent spat within the team. Our Lee Seung-jae has this report.
After a disappointing 1-1 draw in front of a sold-out crowd in Seoul last week, the South Korean national football team took on Thailand again on Tuesday night, this time in Bangkok. The team looked much more composed in the return World Cup qualifying fixture, cruising to a 3-0 victory. The Taeguk Warriors took the lead in the first half when striker Cho Kyu-sung's close-range shot in the 19th minute was tapped in by Lee Jae-sung. Captain Son Heung-min scored in his second straight match after the break to give South Korea a 2-0 lead. And who better to link up with Son for the second goal than Lee Gang-in, who was mired in a controversy after the AFC Asian Cup last month when it was reported that the two scuffled over a game of table tennis a day before their semi-final match against Jordan, which led to an injured finger for Son. Lee suffered heavy criticism from fans for what they said was inappropriate behavior toward the highly respected Son, which led to a public apology from Lee after he joined the national team last week. But it seems they have put their troubles behind them as they celebrated the second goal of the match, with Lee jumping into the arms of Son. Hyundai FC midfielder Park Jin-sup, a second-half substitute, marked his international debut with a goal to make it 3 and seal the win. The win means South Korea now lead Group C with 10 points after 4 matches, while Thailand dropped down to third in the group. China are 3 points behind and second in the group following a 4-1 win over Singapore last night. South Korea plays both Singapore and China in June. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Korean thriller Exuma has become Distri's first local production to hit 10 million in ticket sales. Our Kim Bo-kyung has more on what this means for the Korean film market.
The first Korean movie to surpass 10 million admissions at theaters this year. A cult thriller Exuma reached the milestone on Sunday morning, just 32 days after its release on February 22nd. The release of a big competitor, the Hollywood blockbuster Dune Part 2, around a week after Exuma hit the cinemas, made people wonder if it could reach the 10 million mark at all. But there was nothing to worry about, as the movie has hung on to the top spot at the local box office ever since its premiere. Directed by Chang Jae-hyun, who has been pioneering the so-called Korean occult genre with his previous films The Priest and Savaha the Sixth Finger, the film stars veteran actors Choi Min-sik and Kim Go-eun. The supernatural mystery unfolds when a team comprised of a shaman, a feng shui expert, and a mortician are asked to relocate the tomb of a wealthy person in the U.S. While everyone feels a common sense of dread when it comes to graves, the director said he wanted to add some Korean elements to this.
I thought adding uniquely Korean elements revolving around shamanism and feng shui would serve as a useful plot device in telling the story.
And this worked out well. The film has become the 32nd to attract more than 10 million moviegoers in Korea and the 5th since COVID-19, following The Roundup, Avatar: The Way of Water, The Roundup: No Way Out, and 12/12 The Day. In terms of Korean movies, it is the 23rd one to exceed the 10 million mark in ticket sales. And it's all the more meaningful for the director, as this is the first movie in the genre to reach such a milestone. With Exuma surpassing 10 million ticket sales, some suggest this is a sign of a full recovery of Korea's film industry. However, one expert says it is a bit early to say that.
It is great to hear that Exuma is doing so well, but it is also true that much attention was solely focused on Exuma. Moviegoers have become hard to attract as they go to the theaters only when there are films they want to watch. So it is quite premature to say that theaters have fully recovered.
With the latest installment of South Korea's mega-hit crime action franchise, The Roundup, to be released in late April, eyes are on whether the Korean film industry will show significant recovery signs then. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
This is all we have for this week. We thank you for watching Weekly News Highlights. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.